Hello, so my name is Mike Brown, and this is my Module 1 video for ACTE 630. So we'll start with the slide, my About Me slide. As far as my personal info, there's a picture of my family over there on the right. I've been married to my wife for 8 years, and in that time we were blessed with twins. They're 5-year-olds now. They are in kindergarten. Little boy and a little girl. I am originally from Coatesville, which is toward the Philly area. If you're unfamiliar, we're close enough to Philly to consider ourselves from Philly, but not really Philadelphians. I like to spend a lot of time with my family. It's kind of my main go-to for when I have time to myself. I also am a nerd to the core, so science. I am a science teacher. We'll get to that in a second, but because of that, it's kind of built in. I do a lot of gaming, tabletop board gaming, video games, reading. I'm a history buff. I'm also kind of a hands-on guy. I'm always doing something, as my wife says. There's usually not a time that I'm not doing or thinking about doing something. Woodworking, gardening, stuff like that. As far as my educational background goes, like I said, I am a science teacher. I teach 8th grade at Manor Middle School for Penn Manor School District. This is my 11th year teaching in public education, and I'm one of the lucky few in which I've been able to spend the majority, well, the entirety of my career in the same classroom, which is pretty awesome. I teach physics and chemistry, but my undergrad from Millersville was in biology secondary education. But because of all the science that I got in my undergrad, I'm qualified to teach the chemistry and physics as well. I graduated in fall of 2008, and then I was hired for a long-term sub at the other middle school for Penn Manor, and then they liked me enough that they kept me on, and here I am. I'm currently working on my master's degree. I'm about a quarter of the way through, so just keep plugging along with that. As far as my experiences with technology in the classroom, Penn Manor is a one-to-one classroom, so we have ThinkPad laptops all the students are equipped with. And because of that, we've made a couple changes over the past couple years that we've had the computers to integrate some things into the classroom. We are a Google Suite school, so we have access to all of the Google products, and we use them pretty predominantly in school. There are other programs that other teachers use, Schoology, Moodle, stuff like that, but Google is kind of the predominant push in our district. I've also had access or experience with Kahoot, quizzes, Study Island for PSSA review. And then as far as personal use, the program that I'm currently in, all my classes for my grad program are in the online program of Desire to Learn through Millersville. So looking at the prompts that we were to kind of come up with answers for, the quote of good teaching is good teaching, whether it's online or in a brick and mortar. I do agree with this, mostly because location is not necessarily the number one factor that affects how you can learn something. I always liken it to apprenticeships or on-the-job training or even student teaching. A lot of the stuff that I learned while student teaching, you couldn't really learn in a face-to-face classroom. With that said, though, the act of learning isn't necessarily bound by any physical barrier, but there are pros and cons to both brick and mortar and an outside location. Schools were originally set up to have all the people gathered in one place and be able to assimilate that information out to the masses easily. And now with all this communication that we can do digitally, there's been this kind of interesting shift. The biggest issue with this is I think rapport building is kind of the big factor when it comes to education. People are really willing to listen to somebody if they have a good relationship with them. So good teaching is good teaching, whether it's online or brick and mortar. Sure, as long as you're buying into what that teacher is trying to teach you. Um, this is where I get a little hung up with online instruction, because as far as the uh, connection with students and even the hands-on experience, it's being a science teacher. It's a little difficult to think about how I'm going to be able to have a kid do an experiment, see a Bunsen burner react with a chemical reaction, or whatever it may be, some demonstration in the classroom. Doing that through a video is a lot different than when a student can see that right in front of them. So yeah, the location is not the number one factor. Teaching can happen anywhere, but I think depending on the location, the ease of access and productivity can be affected greatly. For the second prompt, the challenges of online ed, coming from Archibald, um, I think my biggest challenge that I see from those readings is the issue of motivation. In our district, we look at online instruction almost as a last chance program, or for students that aren't having their education needs met in the classroom for whatever reason that may be. And we use a program called Edgenuity. Now, I'm not very familiar with it. I'm not one of the registered teachers for this program. However, a couple of my colleagues are, and it meets those standards. However, the chances of a student being successful are kind of um, based around how much motivation they have in their education, and how much buy-in they have. And a lot of the time, the students that are in these online instruction programs are there because their motivation was already lacking in the brick and mortar classroom. So that's probably my biggest issue. My second is that as Archibald talked about, the time constraints. Um, in reading the article and just knowing to some people that have taught online courses, uh, it's very truthful that the amount of time that goes into planning these online courses is tremendous, mainly because the ever-changing landscape. There's always something new coming out, something on the horizon with technology. We're moving so fast. So you also have to be able to balance how much energy you're willing to put in, how to get to connect with these students, but also how much is too much. When have you put out too much of your own personal time that you don't actually get to be a human as well? So setting up those limits. The my hopes for online ed, as far as that goes, since I teach middle school, getting the buy-in, learning how to get that rapport with students in an online classroom that I can usually generate pretty easily in a classroom face to face. I also hope to get a toolbox, the um, overused kind of term of at my teacher toolbox, but of things that I know work that have been vetted by professionals in my field. So. Looking at the approaches, Rice talked about the four guides. As far as that goes, I think every teacher fits these categories at some point in their educational career. Even on a daily basis, you could jump between a couple of them depending on what you're doing in your classroom. Um, I think the biggest issue I could see is getting stuck in some of them. I have here the facilitator loop, which I've talked to a couple colleagues, and they're saying how when you get to that facilitator kind of aspect and doing all the upkeep of adding lessons and grading this and making sure this is being accessed and keeping the content up to date, you can kind of get stuck in the details and not see the forest for the trees, if you will, and get the true mission done of getting your lesson across to the students. Lastly, as far as the commercials go, in watching them, they really are a utopian kind of presentation of the teaching that goes on in these schools. Now they're commercial, so they're trying to sell themselves. I get that. The K to 12, because it was the longest, seemed to cover a majority, or at least more, of these standards than the rest. They talked about their qualified teachers, and they emphasized the collaboration process. I also have that they meet, they kind of talk about how they can meet the diversity or the needs of the students that wouldn't normally fit in the normal classroom. Uh, they do that by establishing goals for their students, taking the data, kind of rebuilding all that, and doing that with a professional rapport. The Connections Academy was kind of lacking, but it was also a shorter commercial. It was only 32 seconds, I think. So it showed that it has qualified teachers, and they had the collaboration piece just based by looking at the images, but you had to kind of fill in the blanks there. Lastly, the Carpe Diem schools, they met standard C, which is the collaboration aspect, and F by saying how they are able to meet like the time constraints with the diversity. You can have 24/7 access, but that was kind of a stretch. It was alluded to. My biggest problem, actually, the Carpe Diem schools commercial almost had an us versus them vibe, which in the grand scheme of things, we're all trying to reach the same goal. And yes, these are commercials, but they had a very negative slant towards the I think they use the quote old school. Don't before you get on that bus, or however they stated it. They made it very negative to be in a brick and mortar and come to the new fancy Carpe Diem school, which, like I said, it is a commercial for them to sell essentially their product, but we're all trying to reach the same mission here. So it makes it a very interesting argument when you have these two facilities fighting over the same end result. So that's my feelings for the first module. I look forward to meeting all of you digitally, and hopefully we have a great class this semester. Thank you.